You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by...
Chrissy, Mancini, Nichols.
Dawn Miller.
Hey, Dawn, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Dawn.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How's everything going on your end of the country?
It's going fine. It's really cold. Every winter, I'm the biggest kind of Brooklyn patriot you'll meet, but every winter I rethink my life choices, especially now. I work with people all over the country, and so I'm working with Aspen, and it's cold, but at least there's snow and skiing, and I'm working with West Palm Beach, where it's just like beautiful and sunny. So I feel like I have even more exposure to people who don't have the New York City winters.
Yeah, I was a transplant from San Francisco, or from New York to San Francisco, and I do not miss walking around in my parka, although I had it on this morning because it got down to like 38 here.
Yeah, so you didn't get rid of it. I know some people just like get rid of that stuff or don't even own it, but you might need it for when you travel or an occasional cool winter day.
Yes.
I do find when I go to the Midwest or something for a winter meeting of some sort, I'm woefully unprepared. I don't have the ankle length jacket or anything like that. And when it's 8 degrees outside, that's not good.
You can tell who doesn't belong.
Yeah, you could tell who doesn't belong. I have some tights from running back in college that I bring with me if I ever get into those situations in like Chicago or something.
Yeah.
So no parkas, but I have tights that go under my jeans. Is that allowed? Is that okay? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything to keep warm, right?
You can get flannel lined jeans.
I guess you can.
Don't do that.
Oh, don't do that? Okay. I'll stick to my longhorn tights.
Yeah.
Full length.
I think you've got more street cred in those than in the flannel line jeans.
Well, Chrissy, how are things for you? How's everything going?
Going well. Yeah, I'm excited about the new year, and it seems like we're getting closer to having some sort of sense of normalcy at some point this year. So I'm trying to be optimistic. Talk to me in a few weeks, but right now I'm optimistic.
If we were in the dark tunnel before, I think there's like a pinprick of light there that you can see ahead. It's very small.
It's very small.
It's very small, but it's there. But it's there, which is comforting. I'm doing well. Mostly we're cooking stuff and watching TV like we've always done. We've taken to watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is a funny show. So we try to stick to the funny shows, away from all the dramas and stuff. There's been all these advertisements for like scary shows and scary movies, and I'm out. The real world
true crime.
Yeah, true crime, all that stuff. It's too much for me. I can't deal with it. The real world is too much. All right. Well, this is episode 80. Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. Some smaller news things before we get to the bigger things. So DOT released its list of political appointees, and I was happy to see that some of our friends from the show are on the list, including Danny Simons, who was recently on Talking Headways with her previous job at Waze. Robin Hutchison, who joined us for our election night extravaganza. Are you recovered from that yet, Chrissy? I don't know if I am. 7 straight hours.
We learned a lot of lessons.
We did learn a lot of lessons. Don't do 7 straight hours on YouTube in one night. And then also Stephanie Pollock, who she was a conference speaker, so I haven't had her on the show, but we worked together before on some TOD stuff when she was at the Dukakis Center. So a few people that we're pretty close with, which I'm pretty excited about. Any names that you all recognized or are familiar with that caught your eye?
Yeah. Well, Danny caught my eye. She's another New York City transportation person, so I was very excited to see her. And my old boss, Mira Zoshi, is heading up the the truck regulator, and I always mess up the acronym, so I'm not even going to try. But I'm really excited. I think that there are so many parallels going on with what's going on in kind of the freight world right now. That, you know, her experience as chair of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, where she was managing the arrival of ride hailing and its explosive growth and all the kind of safety and worker issues that were coming to bear. So I'm really excited to see her in that role. And she and Polly Trottenberg worked very closely together as fellow commissioners. And so it's kind of cool to see some of the band getting back together.
Yeah, and Steve Cliff, who is at CARB, the California Air Resources Board, is going to head I always say NHTSA, but the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration. And why that's important is because CARB is the agency that took on vehicle fuel standards and sued the Trump agency for trying to push them back. So that's a clear message of what they're prioritizing.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I saw Robin was going to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Safety Policy, which I'm excited about that, having
Yes.
somebody from a city thinking about safety. And she was the head of NACDO too, so it's good to have, that going on as well. So I'm excited about that.
And then is it Nuria Fernandez? Nuria? She is going to FTA. She's a VTA right now, heading up VTA, and she's also worked in New York, Chicago, DC. She ran Department of Aviation in Chicago. So I just think there's a clear brain trust selected to help establish all the policies and policy changes. So it's just pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's super exciting to see that people who we know the topics are actually going to be. I know this is that seems like a low bar, right? But people that actually have worked on this their whole lives are actually going to be political appointees, and not just somebody who will ruin the agency. I know that's a simple thing to ask for, but
Well, I think when Pete was first announced, there was so much, he's not a transportation person, but we even talked on our show about how he's going to be the messenger, and he clearly is going to be a great messenger, and he's going to appoint the right people, and he is. So, I think it's just exciting. Like you said, like these are the experts in the field we look to, and now they're going to be running the programs and the money.
And he's, we know he has ambition, right? He's a young guy. He's not going to leave the agency and go into retirement. So he's looking to make a name for himself and be in the headlines, right? So I think that's also very promising. If he is a good spokesperson, how many more people are going to know he's the transportation commissioner than knew Elaine Chao, So I think that's another exciting thing about having him in that position.
Yeah, for sure. And then Dawn, I want to ask you, what you're working on these days. What's interesting to you in terms of what Coord is doing?
Yeah, so lately we've been really focusing on commercial loading, which was
that's exciting.
Kind of
I like commercial loading.
I do. I mean, how when you're working on something and you travel around cities and you just kind of see it everywhere. And so right now my phone is just full of pictures of different vehicles loading poorly and well and all that stuff. But, it's one of those things that was a headache in a lot of cities before COVID. And it's one of those things that COVID has also, I think, accelerated the problems associated with it, just in that there's so much of it, and we often haven't designed our streets or given these drivers information to really manage it efficiently. So we've been working to roll out our basically our technology in 4 U.S. pilot cities. We're live in Nashville and in Aspen and West Palm Beach, and the basically it's an app to give commercial drivers information about where there's available loading space for them, hopefully giving them that incentive to not just kind of throw it into a double park wherever they usually go, but to actually find the loading zone because they know it's there and it's likely to be available for them. And as you guys probably appreciate, there's all sorts of logistics involved with getting such a thing up and running. in some cases, cities can use existing authority. In some cases, we've helped the city get new authority to charge for loading activity and kind of manage it in this way. So it's been really fun. It's been really fun getting to know kind of the city teams in each of these places, and very kind of inspiring that despite all of the resource constraints and kind of chaos going on, working in city government, and these times that they've been able to pull it off, and launch in this year. So it's been really fun.
Do you have enough pictures in there for an Instagram account?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I don't feel like I'd have a daily post, but I'd have several each week. Maybe I'd get submissions. I feel like I'm not the only one with this passion. So I don't know though. Instagram was too addictive. I had to nix it. Now I'm slightly addicted to LinkedIn, but at least there I'm like educating myself a little bit, like reading articles and stuff, as opposed to just making hearts on pictures of every baby I see.
I haven't quite heard of a LinkedIn addiction. That's an interesting
that is
one.
a first.
I mean, if you don't have these other things, then you have to have the thing you check too often, right?
You have to fill the space, right?
I mean, and I think you start to see, maybe if you're an addict, you start to see the others.
Well, I'm Twitter. I'm Twitter and then a little Instagram, not a lot, but I don't do a lot of like work type posts. It's mostly like food and travel and things like that. So, I think that the Twitter is the one that gets me, and it, I probably should take a step away sometimes. So I think that's good that you've been able to put down your Instagram. Well, so before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcast, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. All right, so let's get to the main discussion. And, we're back at Pete Buttigieg, and I think I'm finally spelling his name right in my notes. It's getting easier and easier each time. Which is good.
It's actually in spell checker in Word.
It is now?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay. That's good.
Today.
That's good, because I feel like I've just like cracked the code on spelling it correctly, but that's good. That's helpful if I ever just want to type through it. So the first confirmation hearing was last week, and we got to see a bit of the discussion about what some of the priorities are for the new Biden administration. And we got to see how all these senators, what their interest is and pet causes are, because they asked a lot of questions about specific things. I was happy to hear him chat about autocentricity, about Vision Zero. Obviously, passenger rail got some shout outs. What did you all find interesting about kind of this hearing that happened last week?
Well, it was so exciting to watch. It was probably one of the first times, and I've watched many transportation secretaries speak, and like Dawn saying, because Pete Buttigieg wants to be something more than Secretary of Transportation, he cares about, he just can speak so eloquently about the topics, and he's such a great messenger. And in politics, you just cannot ever underestimate that. So to see someone that's so passionate talking about the things that we care about and making these clear and coherent arguments, and it was so clear even on the committees, Republican and Democrat were like, it's so nice to have someone here who can talk about these things. And, it's like, we're going to confirm you today. He got a tiny bit of pushback from Ted Cruz, but, that could be expected about, Keystone Pipeline. But other than that, hearing him talk about not just the auto-centric things that we never hear from a transportation secretary, talking about racial and how transportation has caused racial divides and not promoted equity, and just things about modernizing the program, where we're not just, he's talking about broadband and transportation in the same message. And as we know, to do all the transportation and get all the data and infrastructure we need, the broadband is a necessary component. It was just overall exciting to see him have this clear message and see where the priorities are at the department.
Yeah, and I was somebody who, I think when I first heard of him, I was a little bit unsure because I thought Indiana, I didn't think a huge metropolis type of thing. But then, I very quickly read about what he'd done in South Bend and realized he gets kind of city level, street level transportation policy. Because when you talk about something like transportation policy, or any type of policy, there's a very different version of it that goes on at the federal, state, and local levels. And there's some people who really have only operated maybe at that federal level and wouldn't have really the understanding of what authorities cities should have, and what their problems are. So I was very excited to see someone who not only is a mayor, so understands kind of what matters at the city level, but also had actually pushed things forward on his own agenda in a somewhat difficult environment to get that done. So to me, it made it seem like he sincerely believes in this stuff and will bring that to the role.
Yeah, and he talked about the issues around cities not having full-time staff to work on grants or having a lobbyist to go and lobby for billions of dollars or even $1 million. He understands that perspective because mayors have some of the hardest tasks in actually getting things done because their constituents are so close to them. So I think that will be a great view that he'll have at the department, but it'll also just help with how he can talk to people, can talk to the public and Congress members who, many are from small towns and rural areas. So he can be more relatable to them than, someone from just New York or Chicago or LA would.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, there was a really great Washington Post article. I don't know if you all saw that one, but it talked about how he had gotten the two-way streets in South Bend downtown, and how the restaurant owners really backed it after they kind of saw it in action, and those little things, understanding those little details like that, really gets you to see how he could possibly be, like you said, somebody who can talk to all the people who are working in smaller cities as well as larger ones about these issues, especially from a transportation perspective. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also another thing that you mentioned was the thought thinking about broadband and some other things, and that gets me to my next thing, which was kind of something that popped up, and I know that Chrissy, you and I had kind of went a little bit back and forth to Tracy too on email, but one of the really interesting things was the kind of the pushback that's happened over the gas tax. The hearing itself was what you would expect, answering questions and those types of things. But after the hearing, one of the former mayor's spokespeople, came out and said that Pete is against anything having to do with the gas tax. And then today I saw also, I think it was Sam Mintz and Politico reported that Blumenauer said, the gas tax has passed its time. So I'm curious about this push past that. We've talked about the gas tax and raising the gas tax since it's 1993 is when it was last raised, and then it's been kind of this third rail of the politics of the transportation bill ever since. I'm curious what you all think of this kind of this new movement, I guess, away from the gas tax and towards other revenue streams.
Well, having worked on several efforts to raise the gas tax.
Intimately knowledgeable.
Yes. Well, there was a couple of things. One, he said he wouldn't increase the gas tax. So does that mean indexing is off the table? I don't know.
Words.
But I think even with Blumenauer and their language, it's like, why waste the political capital on a tax that is just diminishing returns? We all know that we need to go to vehicle miles traveled, carbon tax, taxing or allowing states to have tolls on interstate highways, which I've also worked on a lot. So if the bills are there, they can just pass them. But again, I think, for example, Biden wants to have 500,000 electric vehicle chargers, and they're talking so much about electric vehicles. Why would you propose to increase a tax when the other thing you're proposing will not generate revenue from that tax? So, I think obviously vehicle miles travel tax is really difficult to implement. There's so many policy and legal and data issues. So that's going to take a while to even get in place and ramp up. So could you do a hybrid of something around indexing the gas tax for the short term, or just, I mean, let's face it, continue to take from the general fund? But then with any infrastructure bill, institute a phased in VMT or a carbon tax. I know that Biden has people in the business community that have been working on the carbon tax and continue to do and look at revenue numbers. And a carbon tax, a wide range carbon tax would bring in, even if it's like $25 per ton, would bring in over $1 trillion in 1 decade. I mean, compare that to the gas tax, which brings in about 36 billion a year. And that's wide range. I mean, obviously that's not going to happen. So there's just a lot of room to negotiate with the carbon tax. And you're actually working on the climate policies that, we're supposed to be working on in tandem with transportation.
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of liked what he said initially, which sounds more like your hybrid approach, which is, a gas tax is something because the guts of implementing that policy already exist, that you can increase and start raising revenue soon, because these other policies, which are where we need to go, will take time to set up. And this administration is to hit the ground running. They're operating as if they only have 4 years, and I worry about getting bogged down in fights over revenue sources. One of the big lessons from New York City congestion pricing is try not to make the policy debate about the funding mechanism. Like it's part of it, of course, but how much can you focus people on all of the things they're going to get from it? And I really think that improvement in strategy is why the congestion pricing passed in New York State this time around when it didn't in other times, because there was such a inspiring vision for what the public would get from it. And so I just don't want too much of the focus, and we're part of the problem talking about it right now. I just don't want too much of the focus to be on the revenue source, because that is nobody likes to pay anything. So how do we get people really rallied about what it's going to get in exchange, and not get bogged down in the mechanics of setting up something new? It needs to happen, but I don't want it to gate our ability to kind of have the infrastructure in the pipeline.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and any of these taxes we're talking about will hit low-income people more than wealthier Americans. So I think one of the things we did in Illinois was we only talked about what you get. We talked a little bit about what we were going to do on the revenue side, but really it was about the program and how we were looking at protecting low-income people. So I completely agree with you. But I would say you heard it in the committee hearing, Republicans and Democrats were talking about, we just use the general fund. At least they have acknowledged that we want all these things and we can't pay for them. I still think it's going to be really difficult to implement a new tax. But if this was the time, this would be the time. We'll see if it can happen.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that really caught me, and I appreciate that, discussion that we're messing things up by talking about taxes, and I appreciate that, because I do want to talk about, what we get out of it. And I think that the things that we do get are this larger infrastructure bill, which includes broadband, which the FCC just came out the day after the inauguration. I think it was the day after the inauguration, or the day before Ajit Pai left, whichever. Both of them are my favorite things. But basically, they came out with new rules to measure who gets how you can get broadband, or who gets broadband is actually getting it, versus like these random rules about block groups versus actual houses that actually get the access to broadband. And so measuring it will be one way that you can figure out how you can actually provide broadband that people need to go, to get to where they go in terms of access for healthcare, for schools, for jobs, all these things that we've been worrying about because of the pandemic, and it's made it more stark, right? I think I published this in the newsletter yesterday, but 400,000 teachers don't have access to adequate broadband to teach their students during the pandemic, which is awful because those students are missing out on educational stuff. So we have that, we have water, we have solar, we have all of the energy stuff that we're talking about. We have these transportation things that we want to do. We want to, fix our roads and bridges. We want to focus on fix it first, all those things that T for America talks about, obviously. We want to think about the rules and regulations for autonomous vehicles and electric chargers and even curb management, right? We want to think about all these things, and we want to do things like keep Amtrak going through Montana and the things that matter like that. There was a New York Times article about that, about how the rural communities there really depend on that train to get to doctor's appointments in other cities and things like that. So all of these, we talk about, the gas tax or a carbon tax. I think moving to that hybrid model that you all were talking about, or even just a carbon tax. I mean, I know that, Al Gore, that the first time I heard about that in 2006, I was like blown away. I was like, we can stop doing payroll taxes and just do carbon taxes and save the earth. Yes, let's do that. And then, it obviously got shot down for 14 years. But here we are again with the ability to do something about this climate that we're in, literally and figuratively. And I like the move. I like getting away from the gas tax because it's a non-starter. It's something that we all fight about all the time. So why keep fighting about it when we can have this kind of new discussion about all these other things that we want to have people have, like broadband, like water, like transportation, and we can get that if we save the planet as well. I like that kind of framing of it to where we can think about many things at once. And I think that environment piece is something that Buttigieg and a lot of the folks in the cabinet have been kind of, grokking together on too.
Yeah, and if you even look at, in California, we have the cap and trade bill, and that generates a ton of money for transportation and investing in different transportation modes that will reduce auto reliance and reduce the use of fossil fuels. And I mean, right now I'm applying for a grant through that revenue stream that would look at how to build a microgrid for a transit agency, but could also be used by the community. I mean, it's really, when you look at how cap and trade dollars are used, it is really about sustainable transportation, but it's all these greater community benefits where, and in rural areas where we want to create hubs around a microgrid that have broadband, because these areas don't have access to great Wi-Fi or almost no Wi-Fi. So I think you could take all these different models that we've seen in other places and apply them. And as we think about, our transportation system was built for the 1950s. It's Buttigieg's job to modernize it now. And using some of those examples, I think, can be helpful to show people what they can get.
I think Chrissy said it well. There are a lot of models here. There probably are a lot of models in other countries for us to be looking at as well.
Yeah, I think one other thing about what we're talking about in terms of, we keep hearing so much about electric vehicles and electric chargers and all this infrastructure. And number one, we have to get the electric grid up to a place that can support all of this. But number two, electric vehicles still generate emissions. It's not, that's why we're looking into microgrids, because this is an opportunity to use solar power that can maybe even be stored so that there could be backup power in case of emergency. So much focus on electric. I think we need to also talk about, which he is doing, bikes, walking, transit. I saw this stat where we've invested last year $500 billion in clean energy technology, and we have been making all these investments. But in 30 years, since 1990, oil, natural gas, and coal went from 81% of the world's energy consumption to 80%. And a lot of that was last year because of the pandemic. So it shows that we need to make just a massive amount of investment in new technology and cleaner technology that just isn't about electric vehicles, but is about transit and zero emission vehicles. And I think putting the head of CARB, the Air Resources Board, in the administration is showing that there is a need to get to that.
Yeah, I'm also, an electric car, is better than a very high emission, internal combustion engine car. But electric cars sorry to all the EV enthusiasts out there, they just don't get me excited because they're still cars. And when I think about the direction we need to go in, it's getting people out of cars, and how do we make transit a really attractive and available option for more people, where it's never going to be the option for everyone in this whole big country. But I think we could be doing a lot better there. And, I actually sometimes worry that at the federal level, there tends to be too much of a focus on just electrifying the cars and keeping the huge numbers of people, and that's the only way they can really get anywhere. And so I hope as a mayor and as somebody who has kind of seen some possibilities for mode shift, that is also really a priority in this administration. And being a New Yorker, I actually did a lot of work on EVs when I worked for the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. There's also just real constraints to having electrical infrastructure here. Most people here don't have a garage where they could even have a charger if they wanted to. So if there's so much focus on just electrification, that quickly reaches, I think, its limits in certain types of locations, and is kind of misdirecting a lot of money and resources when providing actually high quality, high frequency bus service is something that, could move the needle a lot more on sustainability and just kind of quality of life in cities.
Yeah, and electric buses and electric bikes and other vehicles have to be a part of that discussion. But I also remind folks, and we talk about this all the time, that brake dust and rubber pellets are another really bad part of automobility, which continues with electric cars. So there's still a problem out there. It's still killing salmon in Washington. There's still all this stuff that goes on because of our automobile addictions. And they're necessary to a certain extent. I agree with that. But we can do much better because we have a lot to do.
Yeah, and it's not just urban places that don't have garages, or there are renters that can't install chargers. In rural places, there's lots of majority people renting or low income, and they can't install chargers either. So, I completely agree that better frequency buses and high quality transit is what we need. I was reading though about another, just prioritizing bikes or pedestrian safety and bike and ped infrastructure. And I know that the People for Bikes and the Rails to Trails, they've always said we need an administrator for active transportation. And the fact that we spend less than 10% of the federal transportation budget on active transportation, I hope that it will get some kind of agent or department authority or more funding, because we can talk all we want about autocentric and taking down highways that have gone through community, built their communities, but until that we have someone there that is actually advocating for safer and better active transportation, it's great talk, but we need the money for it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll get to Dallas's mobility plan, which I think is really cool. But let's first talk about eliminating single-family zoning in Sacramento. So the Sacramento City Council unanimously supported a move to get rid of single-family zoning in the city, mirroring small changes in Oregon and Minneapolis. The new rule would allow 4 units on each parcel of land, though design guidelines would be included as well. This is by Teresa Clift at the Sacramento Bee. What did you all think when you first heard this? I had no idea this was happening, but then it hit, and it's there. So.
No, you're not following Sacramento.
I follow what RT does and some of the things that the transit agency does, and I know that there's supposed to be a line that's been going to the airport forever, but those are the things that I've been watching, but I haven't been watching the zoning codes, unfortunately.
Well, I work with the city of Sacramento and West Sacramento pretty frequently, and I'm not surprised, because the work that I've been doing with them has really evolved, and even before my time, since we've worked with them, from just parking studies to now it's really about curb management. Dawn, your favorite topic. Curb management, curb monetization, the parking manager also is in charge of curb management, and he looks at how revenues can be used for transit and walking and bike infrastructure. And they already eliminated parking minimums downtown. So they were, kind of halfway there. But upzoning the entire city, I'm just actually not surprised because it's a growing place. I'm working in the city of West Sacramento on their bridge district plan, and the whole point of that plan is to upzone a whole section of West Sacramento too, just across the river. So it got unanimous support. There was even on during the meeting, there was very little public pushback, which is surprising. So I'm not, I'm not surprised, and I hope, but I don't have a lot of confidence that other cities in California will follow.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about Sacramento politics to have been surprised or not, but I was thrilled. This seems like such an easy thing to do, and I actually, when I saw that article, I pulled up Google Maps and went on Street View and started walking around the residential neighborhoods, and I'm just like, there's so much space. There's all these driveways. The street parking is plentiful. Like, my parents live in a suburb of New York, and they sometimes get grouchy about multifamily homes, and their main stated reason is parking. And I just get furious because in my whole life, I have never been unable to park on the block that is my parents' block. I've never had to park on another block, maybe down the block on a really tough day, but that they will say that. So, and I think that sometimes, like, the idea of living in like a single family is like there's like a psychological thing that people feel like somehow that's like some sort of neighborhood. And so they just kind of throw up like logistical challenges that aren't real, or their expectations are kind of crazy that like a good life requires a parking spot right in front of your house, when maybe you'd have to walk to the end of the block if you created this opportunity for more people to afford to live in your beautiful neighborhood, and more of your neighbors to be able to afford to stay in their houses because they can, make a little apartment on the side. And so I was really happy to see it. You do see some movement with accessory dwelling unit ordinances and things like that going on. So I hope there's momentum in this space, because this seems like such a easy way to remove a regulatory barrier to affordability. And fourplexes, like, that's really not dense. Like on those size lots, like fourplexes is not dense. And there's plenty of parking, even if every person there had a car. So I was very excited to see it. I feel like we need to spread the word or something.
There's a lot of fourplexes in Berkeley and in Oakland that I love looking at, actually. The design of them from the 20s and 30s, they're beautiful buildings. And I kind of want to take pictures of all these fourplexes that I see that look like they fit in perfectly with all the houses around them. It's nothing different to a certain extent. It's just that they have walls that can disconnect people, can't open the other person's door. So, I find the adversarial tact of some folks kind of crazy. And actually this article and this discussion blew up San Francisco housing Twitter, as it always does. It's a messy space, almost a red zone you don't want to go into, but where, the progressive supervisors were fighting with the YIMBYs and the YIMBYs were fighting with everybody else. And I just kind of wanted to yell into the abyss almost, just build freaking housing. I don't care if it's 100% affordable. I don't care if it's affordable housing. I don't care if it's market rate housing. Just build it wherever we can, however we can. Just do it. If we have to get 4 units on a parcel of land, let's do that. We can already have 3 on most properties in the city with the ADU laws and all that stuff. So adding 1 more doesn't seem like that big a deal, but it's like this weird discussion that happens when you think about, changing the Western neighborhoods here in San Francisco. It's like, F all you guys, like if you already live in a house, great. If you don't, then you feel left out, because every house in the city is like $1.2 to $5 million, and it's ridiculous.
Well, guess what? Most of those houses have more than a family living in them.
Yeah, exactly. People living in the garage, or like units that people have been living in for a long time that aren't actually permitted. That they've been in. They get a statutory pass or whatever because of the history of it. There's so many people living in so little space here in San Francisco. It's crazy. So I'm sure it's a similar in Brooklyn and in New York as well, and other cities around the country. It just feels like, can we just build more housing everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, there's, I live in a kind of mostly like brownstone-y area of Brooklyn, and there's people who are really mad about like the like big high rises going on in downtown Brooklyn, and I was like, bring it on. Like every one of those that goes in is like fewer people who are trying to, competing to rent where I rent. let that, you need supply. Of course, if you can get all the, affordability and stuff like that, and cities often do have leverage to get that, great, use it. But supply helps. Part of it is a simple shortage. So I felt like it's interesting how kind of precious people can be, and not really thinking down the line of, I guess if you're already a homeowner, like the scarcity is good for you, but for most people, the people who want to move here and invent the next great thing, are finding it very hard and have to, live somewhere far with a really long commute or be in really cramped conditions. So bring on the supply. I think on the design guidelines thing, thinking back to Sacramento for a second, I think, I don't know what the specifics are of their design guidelines. Hopefully they're nothing that's like super onerous and expensive, but I think sometimes showing people what it really looks like can be very helpful. I think of Newark, New Jersey, which has some very beautiful neighborhoods, but also has some neighborhoods where there was just very, very like poor designed multifamily housing where there's not, it's just kind of, it almost looks like, it's just a big box where they've maximized the number of parking spaces on that site and the square footage inside without any kind of regard for how it shows up and relates to its neighbors and it's the experience for someone walking down the street. And so I think like, I wouldn't want my block to turn into that. So I get people's trepidation, but then there's all these places where people do a really beautiful job and you can allow for density without allowing for any sort of design. I feel the same way about like big box stores in cities that you can have a Kmart and have it be in a downtown building where it doesn't mess up the kind of feel of the city, but still allows a different type of use to take place there. So I think sometimes the zoning fight can really be taken down a notch if there's a fair set of design guidelines put in place.
Yeah, and that's where I know that they are going to have design guidelines in Sacramento, and that was something the neighborhood associations were really pushing for, and the mayor said there will be design guidelines, and that's was part of the debate and how they got this passed. But I think it's such a good point of showing people what this looks like. Still is difficult to pass, even if you show them what they're getting. But just most of, even in San Francisco, like you said, Jeff, you walk around and see fourplexes and triplexes, and they're the same size as the house next door. And thinking about just the cost of an affordable housing unit at $700,000 in San Francisco, without more market rate middle housing, let the city figure out how to build like true more lower income affordable housing, and just let the market build the middle income, and that would really help solve the problem. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's any trend here that will, Sacramento is the domino?
I mean, no, not for California cities.
I don't either.
It's just frustrating. I mean, I think that there's just like a deadlock. We've discussed this before, but you have in San Francisco, you have the left and the lefter fighting it out for supremacy in the city, and so you have to take a position on the housing because that's the one thing that the lefter has a strong position on. So if that's even a lefter, if they've all gone all the way over to the other side of the right, I don't know. This weird progressive thing in San Francisco is the name is it gets away from me sometimes. But I just feel like we're stuck in the mud and we can't get out because there's too many people who have cemented themselves in the mud. And it's really frustrating because I don't care. I mean, if you want to build affordable, 100% affordable, do it. Like build those housing units. Like it's frustrating that the people who want the 100% affordable don't know how to get it. They say they want it and then they don't understand what it costs or what it takes to actually build that. I have friends that do affordable housing development and they're always on Twitter saying, what are you talking about? You know how much long this takes? You know how much it takes to get all these credits and all this like stuff added up? And yeah, I want to do more, but then we need more resources and we need the ability, we need land to build these things. So I think it's sometimes they say they want this, but it's actually just more obstruction. So, but in other places, it's actually gonna change. Minneapolis, they did their thing, or the state of Oregon has their thing. At the state level, California has done the ADU and other things that we're trying to do. The RENA allocation for housing is actually a big deal that nobody really saw because it was the process that and it makes people mad now that they have to do their housing allocations. Good job, Scott Wiener and Annie Fryman. But I just see other cities as well. If you think about, say, for an Austin, for example, a lot of folks from the Bay Area and even New York and other places are moving to Austin. There's a crazy amount of people that are morons that are moving to Austin, like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan as well. But like what happens is Austin's the same way. It's still has the same NIMBYism in the center of the city. It still has these progressive groups that I'm friends with a lot of them there too, that say that no more housing because of displacement and gentrification. Yes, I agree. That's a big deal, especially in East Austin. But the only saving grace for the Austin region is that they have this outlet of sprawl that rings the city for miles and miles and miles that the county, Travis County, doesn't have a control over because Hayes and Williamson counties on the north and south just let this go unabated. So that's the kind of the escape valve for a lot of the housing pressure that Austin's going to see. And we don't have that. We have ocean and we have a bay. So this is the ditch we've dug ourselves into. And unless we can build more housing, we're not necessarily going to build ourselves out. And the pandemic has shown that there is a demand for housing, and if it disappears, there's going to be lower prices. So imagine that the other direction if you build more housing. It just doesn't make any sense that we don't see that. It's like we can't see the math and the stuff that's right in front of us. But that's it is how it is. It is what it is. We're trying. We're trying.
There was that New York Times article over the weekend where they interviewed, the 4 people leaving San Francisco going to Austin. And I was like, Austin is already expensive. What is the argument here? If you, like you're saying, you can move to a suburb, but, that's not comparing apples to apples. So, yeah.
You can buy a $5,750,000 house just outside of the core, but in the core, it's expensive still because they don't let they're not letting housing being built in the center either. I mean, in the downtown they have high rises and stuff, but anyways, that's is what it is. Shall we move on?
Yeah, we can talk about this on another show. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm sure we will. Well, this is our last one. I think I gave you all 4 articles, but I think this will be our last one because of time. But in Dallas, a plan to move beyond cars. The city of Dallas unveiled its first ever mobility plan, Connect Dallas, in a committee meeting this week. The plan looks to elevate the importance of pedestrian safety and connect mobility to economic development, the environment, and well-being. The plan acknowledges that the city has become dependent on the automobile and needs to focus resources on active transportation. So this was in D Magazine by Matt Goodman. So the Department of Transportation was reorganized in 2018, and I guess this was one of their first projects. It's good to see cities taking this on, but I'm curious, how you all feel about these plans that city transportation departments are taking on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Dallas well, so where I found myself gravitating was looking at kind of their policy section, just to kind of see, as opposed to specific projects, like what their policies were. And as a curb person, I was exciting about a lot of the stuff they had in there in that space, reducing and eliminating parking minimums, parking policy reform, making a curb management plan, you know, updating their pricing, doing dynamic pricing, doing a freight master plan. Of course, it's always kind of hard for me. I know this is part of the process, but to see like the outcome of a plan to make a plan is like a little bit less exciting right now. Like, but I felt like a lot of the right words were on the page. I don't know really enough about Dallas to know the likelihood of this being carried out, but I liked a lot of the stuff they were saying in that space. I like that they said they wanted to shift traffic analysis from the level of service approach to reducing VMT. That was exciting. I also got really excited about the sidewalk stuff. I think I'm a little spoiled. I've lived in like generally like places with really built out sidewalks for most of my life, but I was kind of on the road for about 6 months during the pandemic, desperately seeking family childcare, and so I lived in a lot of different places and realized sidewalks should not be taken for granted, and a a mile walk is something I would do all the time in my life in Brooklyn or when I lived outside of DC, and it would be pleasant and there would be other people also walking, but just feeling like a real oddball when I got to that point where the sidewalk ended, yet I, persevered on along the side of the road, and it just makes things that should be walkable distances that people would do and enjoy something that only really strange, like urban planner types like do to make a point. And so I really am excited, and I hope that they follow through on a lot of the sidewalk work, because it's so fundamental and to people being able to get around and not look like a crazy person walking a distance that they really should be able to walk.
Yeah, I think I was excited they had a policy section too. I was like, that's cool. And seeing curb management in that section, I worked with a MPO in North Texas last year this time, right before the pandemic. We held a day-long workshop for about 50 cities in the region, and it was just about curb management, and Dallas was there. And, I learned a lot about the lack of curb management going on with, even though they have scooters, they have just such an increase in freight and deliveries and on-demand deliveries, which I'm sure has only increased with the pandemic. So I was excited to see that there. I've been talking with a couple of cities in the region about just the first last mile issue and looking at Dallas's growth. And so Dallas is growing by 41 people every day, which is crazy. And I did not know that DART is the longest light rail system in the country. But it ranks still 7th in ridership. And just seeing how they've built a lot of light rail, but didn't have any of the adjacent land use policies or sidewalk policies to get people to the train station. It's, they have a lot of Fortune 5 companies, but no TOD plan, no TDM plans, transportation demand management plans, so that people don't have to drive and that they do use all the rail that the city has invested in. So that was exciting to see. I think in terms of will it get done, that's what I was more like, the politics of is the city going to adopt this and make this the priority? Looking at the funding again, it's the city spends, they do like 5-year bonds for about $500 million. Usually, like that was the last bond for transportation, and 300 million of that went to maintenance, and they need to spend double that just on the maintenance they have. And I'm sure most of that is related to road infrastructure because that's what they've built. So thinking about where are they going to get money, they brought up Seattle in the plan as an example of raising local revenue, but will they do that? I don't know. So I think there's just a lot of questions on what is the teeth in this, and then how much funding will be there to actually prioritize all the sidewalks, which in the last bond measure only got $14 million out of 500 million.
Yeah, you make a good point about politics, and I think that ultimately a plan is only as good as the people who implement it, right? So being able to make a plan and then have, goals set for that plan, you have to, put your budget into that plan and make it so that the budget is the thing that's doing the talking, because otherwise it's not necessarily worthwhile. I will say, though, that, it's nice to have cities like Dallas who have previously been very auto-centric, and the region as a whole is very auto-centric. And obviously the light rail was built as a commuter function for the most part, to see them start to think in a different way. And I think, Patrick Kennedy and a lot of the folks that are in Dallas that have been thinking about freeway teardowns and thinking about the urbanism of the place. And there's some really good stuff going on just north of the city and south in other parts, to start actually putting together policy. And I think we can talk all day about whether the politics support the policy, but one of the first steps is actually to putting the policy together. If you didn't have anything before, this is actually, a bright, fresh look at in a new direction. So I think, baby steps for a lot of these things, going forward, focusing on sidewalks, focusing on active transportation, focusing on restructuring the transit network as they're doing for DART in Dallas, in the city of Dallas. So those are all big things that need to be done. But you're right, the politics of it need to be behind the policy of it. And I think that I hope that this is something that people look on positively and use it as a stepping stone towards the next thing. And I think they're moving in that direction. Dallas actually has some of the best transportation reporters and papers that of anywhere in the country. D Magazine does a really great job. The Observer does a good job, and the Dallas Morning News sometimes does a good job. So, I think that the writers there understand. They are behind it 100%, and so I think that'll keep them in check as well.
To our conversation earlier, if you're going to ask people to raise taxes or do something to pay for something, it is important that you tell them what they're paying for. And so having this there as something to point to, XYZ would be, what we're asking of the residents in the business community, et cetera. But this is what you're getting, so that, it is an important step, I think, to rallying people to find the funding or find the political will if there is, a vision for what the projects are, and then going that step of saying what are the policies that we need to have to put the projects in place. Because I found that was where when I was working in more in a planning function, I found where I was always gravitating towards was okay, that's a cool project, but what did you change? What were the laws that changed? What were the regulations that changed that made that happen? So it was nice to see. I think it just makes the plan more credible that they had that policy section. Hopefully that package together is what gives people enough kind of faith in the city to deliver it, that they entrust them with the funds to do it.
Yeah, and if you looked at the public engagement part, and they laid out how the public responded to different investment scenarios. And I thought it was interesting because the public clearly liked the least expensive scenario that got the most transit and walkability and bikeways and sidewalks. So, that's what the public wants. And it's actually less expensive than the other scenarios, which were all about more highways and roads. I wish they would have done just one constrained amount of budget to show what you could get, if you don't have different budgets to play with. But it's clear that for the trade-offs and the investment that people want to see more transit. I would assume people moving to Dallas, maybe are people that don't want to live in a suburb that's not walkable. That's what we always, when people talk about the neighborhoods they want to live in, they want to be able to walk to the restaurant or to the shops or, whatever, wherever they want to go, they want to have the walking an option to walk. So I think you're right, Jeff. It's the fact that we consider an auto-centric city that's taking the lead in creating a plan like this and a policy like this is, I think it's a great start, and we'll see where it goes. They have they have a 5-year plan to get all these action plans done. So we'll see.
We have a plan within a plan for a plan. Let's
planners.
plan it.
So look out for the RFPs, I guess, for the follow-up plans. I mean, and something, you guys probably saw, Uber is opening a big office there. I think they're, wanting to be another place for those types of tech companies. And I have it on pretty good authority that, New York City Mayor Bloomberg wasn't necessarily passionate about cycling and bike lanes and all that stuff, but somebody told him that was what kind of attracts tech companies and tech workers, and that was a big goal of his. And so once he heard that those things went together, he was on board with it. So I wonder if maybe there's some of that going on, if they want to attract these types of businesses and workers, if they're trying to kind of create the kinds of spaces that they think that they'll want.
I think that's right. The business community sometimes has the ear of the elected officials, and sometimes it helps to tell them certain things, even if those certain things are really important to everybody else for a different reason. So sometimes that works. All right, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we're super appreciative of that. And $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. And $10 a month will get you our bus-only scarf. And our bus-only scarf is back. So we have more. We sold out of those right before Christmas, but we have more now I'm staring at them right now, actually. So if you want your bus-only scarf, in addition to being a $10 a month Patreon supporter, you can do so by going to theoverheadwire.com. And I also want to mention that we produced an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning in Practice. And if you want to get your hands on one of those, go to raymondunwin.com. So next up is listener questions and comments. Last week, Tracy and I talked about whether folks miss their commutes or not. And Josh Fairchild of Transit Matters fame said this: I miss the walking exercise on both ends of my train commute and the scenes of the city neighborhood life, random encounters, convenient opportunities to duck into shops, the time I used to read the news and keep up with advocacy tasks, and the time to zone out before arriving home. What do you all miss about your commutes, or do you miss your commutes at all?
Well, I've been working from home for a while now, but I do miss just being able to veg out after work, because when you work from home, you just, let's face it, you work all the time. But just being able to veg out or bike, when you bike, you can't look at your phone, or you shouldn't be looking at your phone. So it's just such a way to relax. I've seen people now who are saying they just wake up, an extra half hour or 45 minutes early and do something that would be like a commute and go on a walk or read the paper or something. Maybe that's helpful. I don't know. I'm not doing that yet.
I wish I could do that. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I definitely miss kind of the reading time and the podcast time. And I did really do a lot of errands to and from work just because I was passing by. I was at Trader Joe's at 8 a.m. 3 times a week, just because that made sense. And so I feel like there was a lot of convenience there, but it was also a lot of time. And I found I was really rushing when I was doing daycare pickup. I was always kind of stressed on the way back when that was my job. And so now, I can get to daycare pickup in a 10-minute bike ride, and, that leaves more time and less stress because it's completely controllable. I'm not worrying about a delayed subway and all that stuff. So there's definitely pros and cons to losing the commute for a while. Yeah, I mostly feel fortunate that I have a job where I could stay safely at home, right? And not have to go out and risk it, especially when we didn't know yet whether or not transit was safe.
Exactly.
Well, I think not having a commute for me means I didn't win the Mega Millions, because when I walked up to up my street from BART every day when I came back from Oakland, there was a corner store, and it told you the the Mega Millions and what was the California one? It told you the totals. And so, I think I bought maybe one ticket at one point because it was like the last time it was really huge. And so this time I didn't buy a ticket, but I guess it's because I wasn't passing the thing to see the sign every day that said 750 million or whatever. So
Missed out.
it kept me from my dreams.
Yeah.
Staying
My
away from
parents
the
told
commute.
me, my parents were like, you better go buy a lottery ticket. And I was like, I don't know where to buy a lottery ticket.
Also, your chances are very low. Well, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Puppies and Butterflies, this is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. Anybody have any puppies and butterflies this week? I've got Bernie sitting on chairs everywhere. And especially in transit. That was Bernie's wild ride is what I'm calling it.
No, we can't top it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I heard he's, now agreed to license his likeness to some nonprofit that raises money to feed seniors in Vermont. So there's going to be T-shirts and sweatshirts that are legally licensed, and buying them will feed some folks who need food. So that's kind of a nice outcome of a meme.
Yeah. Two things on that. One, I saw this article that was like Bernie's, it's like the look for less, but this was the opposite. It was because the look is less. So it was the look for more. You can get Bernie's outfit for, $10,000 or something funny.
That's so funny.
Well, I read it and I thought, I was like, no, this is definitely the look for more. And then my wedding photographer, he is just taking photos from all of his weddings and putting Bernie in them. And then I keep looking at his Instagram, of course. And I'm like, because I got married over 10 years ago, and I'm like, am I going to be on these photos soon? And then he was asking people to request. So he's like, this is so much fun. Let me know if you want Bernie in your wedding photo. So
That's awesome. Humans are so creative.
They are. It's amazing.
Nice.
And I'm glad, and that's it was, for such kind of a negative run up, that was kind of a positive thing for that day. Not that day was really positive, obviously, for a lot of us, but, just kind of a general, I think everybody enjoyed it, even if you were on another side. So, that was kind of fun that just everybody was memeing Bernie everywhere. And I saw it in some weird spots, man. There was like some Baby Yoda in Bernie, and there was stuff from movies that I'd seen 20 years ago that I was like, oh, I remember that movie. Oh, Bernie's sitting there. Okay, just a lot of random
on
stuff.
on the ledge in New York. That photo of all the guys sitting on
With
the
their lunch
steel
pails?
beam. Yeah, the lunch pails. Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah. So there were a lot of transit ones too. I know he was on BART, and I know he's on the New York subway. Maybe folks can send in what their favorite one was. Tell us what your favorite Bernie meme was. Where he was sitting. Maybe it was on a bus or a train, or I know that City Lab had a couple of years ago. They did like the fabric of buses or something like that, and somebody had put him on a bunch of those pictures that they shared in the thing. So there's lots of transportation and planning related stuff. So all right, well, Dawn, where can folks find you online?
Well, as discussed, I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Dawn Miller. There's not all that many of us, but I think Dawn Miller Coord. I work at Coord, Coord, would be a way to find me personally. And then Coord, which I am sometimes the voice behind that Twitter account, is at Coord City on Twitter.
And Chrissy?
I'm also on LinkedIn, not as much as Dawn. But on Twitter at Mancini Chrissy or at mycuriouscity.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. I think I have a LinkedIn page for The Overhead Wire as well. If you want to follow there, the podcasts get posted there. But thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire, and thanks to our generous patrons for supporting this week's podcast. And thanks to Dawn and Chrissy for being on this week's show. And we'll see you next time.
Talk